Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Collapse Times this Sunday evening, the 28th of September. And welcome to anyone who is here live. Welcome if you are watching later in the future. Let's see. So tonight I'm going to riff on a few things. I am going to just talk about the current astrology and how it's showing up on a more personal level, and this alchemical concept called the green lion eating the sun that I've been into lately and that feels very resonant. So I'm going to talk about that first, and then that also ties into this interesting phenomena that we saw last week where a whole bunch of people believed that the rapture was coming. And I think that this is a phenomenon we're going to see more and more of coming up, especially in the next 6 to 8 months when Neptune and Saturn are hanging out right at the Pisces Aries threshold, but also just in general as we slip and slide towards the collapse of the American Empire. This phenomenon of immanentizing the eschaton, which I will explain more about that phrase a little bit later, but this phenomenon of people really believing that some event is coming any day now, maybe that has a specific date, maybe it's just something that we're feeling sure is happening any day now, but something that's going to change everything. I think there's going to be a lot of predictions of the rapture, or predictions of the alien spaceship, or predictions of, other forms of apocalypse in the, positive or negative sense. But for the most part, I don't think that these things are going to come to pass. I think that it's kind of a defense mechanism, like a psychological defense mechanism that pops up when people don't want to grapple with the longer term serious problems that are ahead of us. So I'm going to talk more about that a little bit too. And then at the end here today, we'll look at Pete Hegseth's chart. And we'll talk just a tiny bit about the very ominous sounding secret military meeting that has been called for Tuesday. And then I'm going to go live for members only, and I'm going to give a little bit more of my conspiracy theories about what that might be about. So welcome, and if you're here, if you want to just say hi in the chat so I know that I didn't mess things up like I did 2 weeks ago when I talked for 40 minutes and I hadn't actually gone live, that would be awesome, just to confirm. Yeah, and meanwhile, I will pull up our cards from last week. We'll check in with these cards. So I didn't go live last week. I was in an eclipse season. Not like a meltdown, but I just didn't have my brain on straight, honestly, enough to go live. And so I just pulled some cards. And if you didn't see, this is posted in the community posts section of the YouTube page. So not only these cards, but I did post pictures of the description of these cards as well. And we got the Self from the archetype deck, and we got Calcinatio from the alchemy deck. Hello, Ashley. Glad you're here. Yeah, and these cards do feel very relevant to this Pisces Aries threshold situation that we're working with now. We were also working with this energy in the spring. And I'll go deeper into it in just a minute once I start talking about the green lion eating the sun. But these two cards together, this card is basically about heat and when you have enough heat in a certain container that the material changes form. So that's kind of a slow, kind of uncomfortable process is the way that it's described in this card. But it's like an awakening of something that had been trapped beneath the surface, or a form of something, including of yourself, that has been suppressed. So there's a lot of fire energy here, and then there's also the self, which is very related to the sign of Aries. So with Neptune and Pisces doing this dance over these signs, I think that there's probably some important messages here for all of us about kind of the awakening of the self. Yeah, so definitely go back to the community posts page and check out the descriptions of those if you're interested. And that's really all I have for way of introduction, so we'll get right into it. Let me just show you this picture of the green lion eating the sun. I'll just keep this up while I talk, because there's some different versions of this image you can find if you Google the green lion eating the sun. And I don't know, I've really been meditating on the image itself. And so if you want to, just keep looking at it and looking into it while I talk, you're welcome to do that. But yeah, the concept of the green lion eating the sun is a concept from alchemy. And I've just gotten a little obsessed with it over the past few days. It is spoken of in one of the cards from the Alchemy Archetype deck, this one called Oil of Vitriol. So there's another little image there of the green lion eating the sun. And this concept has felt really, really relevant to me, really resonant with the energies that I have been dealing with on a personal level post-eclipse season. And I have talked to a lot of other people that are also dealing with these energies. And usually after eclipse season ends, energies stabilize, but I did not feel like that happened this time. And a lot of it has to do, maybe all of it has to do with Saturn and Neptune on the Pisces-Aries threshold. So let's see. Well, I won't bother going over to the astrology, but we all probably know this eclipse that happened last Sunday was at 29 degrees of Virgo. So it was directly opposite both Saturn and Neptune. Saturn just went back into Pisces. I think that happened on September 1st. Neptune is hovering right at the edge. It officially moves back maybe like early October from Aries into Pisces. And so we are working with this very potent threshold in the zodiac between the last degree of the zodiac and the first degree of the zodiac. And so there's a lot of transformation that happens right at that threshold between Pisces and Aries. And it's kind of a bridge between sleeping and waking. It's a bridge between death and rebirth. I wrote a piece back in the spring when we were first going through this. That was like in March. I wrote a piece about Saturn in particular making that move and the polyvagal ladder, which you might want to check out on my Medium. But basically how I think these energies correspond to the process of moving out of a freeze response. But according to the polyvagal ladder theory, you can't ever go just right from freeze to like the comfortable ventral vagal rest and digest or open and curious kind of nervous system state. You have to move through fight or flight. So you go from freeze up the ladder to fight or flight, and then the higher, step on the ladder is that open, creative, restful, ability to use the higher functions of our brain, that nervous system state that is our desired state, even though we can't expect to be there all the time. So anyway, to think about this energy, you might think back to the end of March and early April. That's the same time that this threshold was activated. And if you think of just the end of Pisces, the very end of the zodiac, the end of a cycle, the end of a story, it's a very much an energy that, almost has both feet off of the earth. And then you think of the first degree of Aries, that very singular, fiery, survival-oriented, disruptive energy that is the beginning of Aries. So that that movement, from the end of Pisces to the beginning of Aries really, really activates a whole new, I think, embodied experience for those of us who are paying attention. And so this second eclipse, so Saturn was already back in Pisces at the first eclipse. I and a lot of other people were definitely feeling that. It felt like I got very tired. I lost my focus. I lost my good routines and habits that I had gotten into while Saturn was in Aries. And then I just kind of felt like that energy got worse at the end of eclipse season after this second eclipse, because the second eclipse, as I said before, was directly opposite Neptune and Pisces, and it gives me the energy of like a pimple popping or a geyser like spurting up or like vomit coming out. There's kind of the pressure energy there from Saturn. That's like the pimple popping, right? And then there's also Neptune, which is basically like the bodily fluids, like the bile or the pus or whatever is like released. And so I just felt like there was this kind of flood of Neptunian energy that was already, creeping in around all of the edges and cracks and corners. And then after this second eclipse, it just kind of got all over the place. And it felt very disorienting. And it also felt corrosive, which brings me to the green lion eating the sun concept. But it felt in this way that I don't really know that I've noticed Neptune before. It felt like something that was really like wearing away at boundaries and structures. And so this concept of the green lion eating the sun, there's a few different ways to understand it. So I'm just going to throw out, what I've learned and take, what resonates here. So in alchemy is something I'd like to learn more about. So I might get some things wrong even when I talk about some basic concepts. So please correct me if I do get anything wrong, if you know more about this. But basically alchemy was and maybe still is, both a physical and like a psychological or spiritual practice. And the concept of gold was very central in alchemy. And the idea was that they're searching for a way to turn lead into gold, right? Or they're searching for a way to turn base metals into gold through chemical operations. And this was before, alchemy existed long before there were microscopes and the ability to observe chemical, molecular interactions and the molecular structures of different elements. But alchemists were basically working with that same concept that we're working with in chemistry. They were putting different substances together and they were seeing how they reacted. They just didn't have the technology to like see the actual physical molecules, but it's basically chemistry. And so they were, kind of the main search in the practice of alchemy was creating gold from other substances by creating chemical reactions. And it kind of, as I understand, alchemy like uses chemistry as a window into psychological and spiritual operations and functions and development. And so gold is an interesting metal. Gold is almost impossible to chemically dissolve. And so in alchemy, there is a substance called oil of vitriol, which is something that can dissolve pretty much all metals and materials except for gold. There also is a way to dissolve gold, and that is with something that in alchemy they called aqua regia, which means like the king's water. And it really does exist. It's a mixture of like two different powerful acids. One of those acids is the oil of vitriol. The oil of vitriol, I guess, is green, has a green color to it. And so in this image, you have the sun, which has a lot of associations with gold, obviously, symbolically, and just its color. And this concept of the green lion eating the sun. So it related to oil of vitriol dissolving. If you had, a piece of earth that had some gold in it, and then it also had other minerals and other substances, you could use oil of vitriol to purify that, to dissolve all of the other substances and leave you with just the gold. And so this concept of the green lion eating the sun referred to a purification of the ego, which of course is another, way of the another symbol, or another thing that the sun is a symbol of. And so the concept is about the spiritual process of dissolving impurities from the ego until you're left with something that is brighter and more pure and more powerful. So it's not necessarily about like ego death, right? It's not necessarily the ego is a terrible thing that we must get rid of. And of course, in astrology, we also know that like the sun exists in the chart. There's no getting rid of your individualizing psychological structure, and we wouldn't want to do that. And I don't know, those of y'all with Pisces suns like me, 25 Pisces sun, like sometimes I feel like my ego just kind of blends in. It doesn't have like much shape or form or boundaries. But in general, the ego is meant to be like a stabilizing, individualizing structure. So we know who we are in relation to who other individuals are. So this process is not about getting rid of the ego, but it's about dissolving impure. And I don't love the word purity. Like that word has a lot of Christian colonial capitalist connotations, but that's the word that's used in these alchemical concepts. And anyway, we can just think of this process as being about dissolving structures that are not helping us anymore, not really like allowing that sun to shine at its brightest. So one alchemical text specifically describes the green lion eating the sun as when the consciousness is overwhelmed by violent and frustrated desires. And one of the key things to be thinking about here is corrosion. And so this kind of brings it back around to Neptune and Pisces. So Pisces is the sign most associated with the ocean. Neptune is the god of the ocean. And we always associate Neptune with dissolving of boundaries. Neptune definitely has this thing that it does where it kind of floods in to any situation that it's a part of, and it just kind of makes things dissolve and open. And, you can think of both of like just how like waves lapping at any kind of structure over time is going to slowly erode that. And you can also think of salt, right? Salt water is corrosive, and more than just the physical act of the water itself, waves lapping at, a building or something like that. There's also the salt that is an inherent part of Neptune and Pisces. And that in particular is corrosive. And that is actually what ultimately was considered a positive process in this green lion eating the sun process, and what one might be doing with oil of vitriol to dissolve the impurities and release the gold. So I feel like this recent eclipse brought up that corrosive substance and sort of the corrosive nature of Neptune and Pisces, and ultimately is giving us an opportunity to purify something, to let old egoic structures be washed away, or maybe it's things to do with memories, maybe it's emotions you're holding on to. But whatever it is, there's something where Saturn is like trying to keep the lid on something, and Saturn is trying to keep, us a little bit in line, a little bit boundaried. But with Neptune coming in, the waves are just kind of going all around. If you imagine Saturn as in Pisces as like a raft on the ocean, these Neptune energies are just kind of eating away at the wood of that raft, and the waves are just kind of coming up all around, bumping up against any way that you're trying to stay stable in your life right now. And so, and I forgot to mention with the astrology, of course, we had the eclipse that was directly opposite Neptune and Saturn. And then the moon moved on, but the sun stayed opposite Neptune for several days. And even now, it's not really out of Neptune's orb. Neptune has a wider orb, like a wider sphere of influence in the zodiac than any other planet. So a planet that is even 10 degrees away from, say, an opposition with Neptune, you're still going to feel that energy. The planets have different sizes of orbs, and their orbs are not exactly linear either. Like Pluto has a smaller orb in my experience, but Pluto is also doing this like under the surface work for a long time before it comes into orb and like really shows up in a physical or tangible way. But anyway, even now, the sun is still really being influenced by Neptune, and you might feel like the waves are, kind of dying down a little bit, but in general, that energy is even now still around. So I don't think that, I think that the description of the green lion eating the sun being something that happens when consciousness is overwhelmed by violent, frustrated desires. I don't think we're all necessarily going to experience it that way. But I think that is a helpful starting point for understanding the concept, because whatever might cause violent, frustrated desires, those are what is being purified by the process of the green lion eating the sun. And so I think that that's referencing a few things. Mostly we experience both with Neptune and Pisces a loss of control. And so even if your loss of control doesn't turn violent, even if it's more about, emotional loss of control, or it's more about, addictive behaviors, I think that can be the same thing. And I think that more, this process is that like what is usually tamped down or suppressed or kept in check floods to the surface during the process of the green lion eating the sun. And yeah, so just an invitation to reflect on that, reflect on last March, end of March especially, and what was up for you then. That was also eclipse season, and that was also when, especially Neptune, I think it was like March 30th, and Neptune crossed from Pisces into Aries. So there was a lot of this energy kind of flooding the collective at that time as well. And then to segue into our next subject of discussion, I think another kind of thing that can come up, so a common theme of Pisces and of Neptune, is projection and illusion and fantasy and, not being able to see clearly what's in front of you. And so when we can't see clearly what's in front of us, the tendency can be to make up something, to make up what we think is there, what we would like to be there. Okay. And one other piece before I move on to the rapture, just another way that you can think about the green lion eating the sun, that's kind of like a higher consciousness way we might experience this, is that some alchemists, and even I think like modern alchemists, talk about this as relating to photosynthesis. So this is plants who create energy from devouring the sun, from eating the sun, right? So we have the green-bodied creature here, and then we have them getting the energy from the sun. So this, of course, is an amazing chemical capacity of plants. And we can also think of this in terms of our own like human psychological process as receiving medicine from the sun or receiving medicine from the ego. So like I said, the ultimate process of the green lion eating the sun is not that the sun dissolves. It's not that the sun goes away, because the whole idea is that gold can't dissolve, right? And in some images that you see, they actually have another sun that's like rising up from the water here. So there's kind of an implication of like, even if the, old ego dissolves, there's one that is surfacing to take its place. I saw a couple things too that commented on the like facial expression that the sun will have in this image, which is always just like pretty stoic, maybe slightly annoyed, but not afraid of the lion, not afraid that it's going to get eaten completely. So ultimately, the idea is that you emerge from this process of the green lion eating the sun with a stronger, healthier, more pure ego or more pure sense of self. So the corrosion takes place and it leaves behind what is essential. So a question that you could ask here is, what can your own sun give you? You can look at the sun in your natal chart, your own natal sun. You can look at the sun where it is now in early Libra, see if that area of the chart, if it makes any important aspects for you, or if that area of the chart has any important messages for you. And we can also just think about this as transforming light, which we might also think of as spirit. We might also think of light as information, and transforming that into something that is nourishing and tangible, and that helps you shine your light in a more optimized way, in a way that expresses your truest self. All right, I hope you enjoyed this image. Please do look deeper into that if it interests you. Yeah, and so let's talk about the rapture a little bit. So, if you didn't hear, there was a preacher back in January who predicted that the rapture would happen on September 23rd to 24th. And he said that God told him. He was very sure about this. I have the link to, if you want to see the original video / podcast, that was where this guy made his prediction. Here it is. I just put that in the chat. I wouldn't necessarily recommend watching it, but if you want to see the original, there it is. And yeah, a lot of people on social media, as they do, took this and ran with it. And there was a whole interesting phenomena that, I learned about from watching YouTube videos about it by these YouTubers who make their YouTube videos about what's happening on TikTok. So apparently it was mostly on TikTok. I don't know how much rapture, rumors were spreading on Threads, but there were a lot of people taking it real seriously. A lot of people, taking it seriously from a Christian perspective and believing that they were going to get raptured and people were going to be left behind. And, everything is kind of tongue-in-cheek on TikTok, but there were people saying that they sold their cars and, were making sure that their neighbor was going to take care of their pet because they were going to get raptured. And there's somebody who had a video about like, be sure to write down all your, passwords to your accounts and stuff so that like your friends and family who aren't going to get raptured can like get into your email and your phone after the rapture. People were taking it real seriously. And of course the rapture did not happen. And I don't know, I haven't looked back to see if any of those people are reflecting on what they believed. Probably not. But I thought this was a really interesting manifestation of these Neptune and Pisces energies, first of all. And also just in general, I think that this is something we're going to be seeing a lot of. It may not always be the Christian rapture, but we're going to keep seeing a lot of people immanentizing the eschaton. So let's talk a little bit about that phrase. I first learned that phrase from Carmen Spagnola, who I have learned a lot about collapse from. And I believe that she learned the phrase from John Michael Greer. So this is John Michael Greer's book, The Long Descent. And I recommend Carmen's podcast episode with John Michael Greer on the Numinous podcast. I also definitely recommend reading this book. It was published in 2008, but it is, and it gets some things wrong, but it is pretty prophetic about the direction that society is headed in. And this phrase, immanentizing the eschaton, was apparently coined by a German philosopher, Eric Voegelin. And I just find it very helpful for thinking about collapse. So basically what it means to immanentize the eschaton is to believe that the full collapse or rapture or apocalypse or whatever other terms you might use is happening tomorrow. And it's going to be one and done when it happens. And so in The Long Descent, John Michael Greer talks about like the myth of progress versus the myth of apocalypse. And he basically says that like you can trace this to Christianity, but you can also see it in Marxist philosophies, and you can also see it in New Age spirituality, how there are basically people fall into two camps. There are people that believe that like technology is going to save us from everything, and we're ultimately just inevitably ascending into like a technological utopia. And there's people who believe that it's all going to end and it's all going to crash really bad. All of a sudden, everything's going to change instantaneously. And so the idea of not immanentizing the eschaton is removing your consciousness from either of those beliefs. So I want to speak to this because I want to warn us against falling into this trap. So a few other examples that I have seen and see now. So I've mentioned some of this before. So like the cult that I was in for 8 years, we kind of had our own version of like the utopian version of this belief. And we believed that when 100 million people were practicing our practice, that was going to be the tipping point of consciousness on Earth. And because of us, people's energy was going to be so bright and so powerful that like all the wars ended and everything bad stopped happening. Like we really believed this. I'm embarrassed always to admit what I believed, but I really believed that. And the guru of the organization taught that, and he had set some dates, and it was going to happen in 2010. We're really sure it was going to happen in 2010, and then it didn't happen, and then it was going to happen in 2012, and it didn't happen. And by the time I left in 2015, 2020 was the time that it was going to happen. But it was definitely this story of like everything's going to change all at once. I also was guilty of immanentizing the eschaton in 2018, 19, 2020, when I was writing about the US Pluto return. And I was like learning about the mythology of Pluto and tracking the astrology and tracking the history. And I really did believe that something was going to happen in 2022, 2023 that just changed absolutely everything in a way that like nobody could avoid it anymore. And obviously a lot has changed in that period of time. And thankfully there is a lot of subjects that people are ready to address now that they were not ready to address in 2018, 2019. People weren't even comfortable with the word fascism to like describe the US government. Now a lot more people are comfortable with that. But yeah, I definitely was in that mindset when I was in the early days of learning about the US Pluto return. It was really hard not to be. So when I learned this phrase, which I think was maybe like 2021 or so, I started like peeling my consciousness back from so much immanentizing. Another example that I think is interesting to think about is the movie Don't Look Up. And I think that movie is pretty good in a lot of ways in terms of the way that it addresses some of the absurdities and irrationalities that we are seeing in the world as we head down this dark path. But the ending of Don't Look Up actually avoids a lot of the tougher questions, because the ending of Don't Look Up, sorry for the spoiler, but the ending of Don't Look Up is the, comet comes and hits the earth, and the last scene is like everything shaking. There's some funny scenes that happen after that last scene, but like mainly the idea is like everything ends all at once. So, you get to observe these interesting things play out in terms of people don't believe that the comet's coming, and people, make up fantasy solutions and whatever in different ways. And in the end, the corrupt, government like doesn't end up succeeding and doing anything. And then the comet comes, and that's the end, right? But probably in reality, there's not going to be an event like that that just takes us all out instantaneously. Probably we're going to need to deal in the long term with issues of survival and quality of life, whatever that might mean. So that's an interesting one to think about. And then there's a whole bunch of other examples too. So like you hear a lot about the year 2027 these days. That, was 2012 back in the 2010s. And I think a lot of people were even looking at like 2020 maybe as just a fancy numerical year that like something big was going to happen. 2027, there's a lot of human design people that talk about 2027 as the year that everything is going to change. We just got to wait for that. It's not really how it is in human design. Like, it's not, the teaching is not that like everything is going to change suddenly, instantaneously in 2027. But I think a lot of people that are, kind of not super, super deep into the teachings, but like just hear that concept that like the gates are changing in 2027. A lot of people take that as like, oh, we just need to wait for that. Like everything's going to change. There's a lot of that energy in 2020. The whole QAnon fantasy was based around like any day now, like the, secret military police are going to sweep in and arrest all the pedophiles and going to make the world change for the better. There were a lot of people who believed, a lot of kind of new age astrology people who believed that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 was going to bring on the ascension and the, like, humans were going to shift from the 3D to the 5D. There was a lot of talk about that. I also feel like with QAnon, it's not really mentioned enough that like on January 6th, like people talk about like, oh, it was an insurrection and they tried to take over and blah, blah. And they, stormed the Capitol. Obviously they did that, but like, I don't think it really gets addressed very often that like a lot of those people believed wholeheartedly that it wasn't really going to be them doing the takeover. They believed that Trump's secret military force was going to sweep in and, they were just going to be backup, right? A lot of people really believed that there was some imminent, massive shift that was going to come from the good government. And, techno-optimism, this whole idea of the singularity, this is completely another example of immanentizing the eschaton and believing that we are becoming one with our technology. That's inevitable. There's going to be a moment when we are completely one with the technology, and that is the singularity, and that is humanity's destiny, and everything's going to change after that. A lot of people in Silicon Valley world that believe that, kind of placing their consciousness onto that. And then just this whole thing that we saw a few weeks ago with so many people believing Trump is dead and just getting really, really swept up in the drama of that, I feel like is also this phenomenon. And this is a defense mechanism of the human mind when it wants to avoid grappling with more complex realities. Your mind and your unhealthy ego really, really love the story that something is coming. Something is going to come that changes everything. And speaking from personal experience, you can feel that deeply. You can think that you feel that deeply. Physically, somatically, you can think that you feel it deeply psychically. Like the energy is just buzzing with something is coming. And in my experience, that is actually dissociation. And that is actually sort of a dissociated euphoria that we get when we land our consciousness away from the uncomfortable reality and like into some imagined future oasis, basically. And again, like that can be something positive, like we're all ascending into the 5D. That can be something negative, like a nuclear war or whatever, which I think we can find, like, I understand even finding that, like, finding some relief in the thought of that possibility of something huge and bad that changes everything, but at least we're all maybe on the same page in that reality. At least there's not this like day after day of kind of like sleepwalking through capitalism, and there's, you know, some event that just nobody can deny what's real anymore. And even the idea of a comet coming to hit the earth. Oh, I forgot to mention the aliens. That's another example. People in the UAP community, like right now everybody's focusing on 3-1 Atlas or whatever, this some I don't know if it's accurate to call it a celestial body, but there's some large piece of material that is moving through space far away, kind of coming towards Earth. Some grifters like Avi Loeb are saying that like it's a spaceship and it's, you know, got these reflective panels on it, and it's got to be like, you know, artificially made, not made by the universe. And that's even just like one example. In general, like people in the UAP world, some of them are really into 2027 as well. In general, I think that there's a lot of possibility inside of those narratives to also think that, you know, even this just disclosure in and of itself is immanentizing the eschaton, when you think of it as something that is suddenly the government's going to drop this news, it's going to be on the front page of every paper, it's going to change everything. That's another example. So anyway, yeah, even if it's something negative that you're projecting your future onto, that can be a relief because it takes away the need to grapple with the long-term questions that are facing humanity. So I think that this astrology of Saturn and Neptune at this Pisces Aries threshold makes us much more susceptible to this kind of thing than we might usually be, having this threshold energy activated and having this late Pisces and Neptune energy just kind of flooding the scenes. Yeah, so it's interesting too. I guess the term immanentize the eschaton was not coined until sometime in the like mid 1900s. But if not the phrase, the concept was also brought out by the church around the time of Neptune's discovery, actually, but in like the 1840s, which was when the Communist Manifesto came out and when Marx was writing and kind of putting forth these other ideas. And so there was this some of the way that the church was pushing back was to say, like, don't believe that heaven on earth is possible. Like, we have to wait until we leave earth to go to heaven, because the ideas, at least that people were taking from Marx's writings, I don't know if, you know, the Communist Manifesto is one thing for anyone who's not familiar. Like, that's one thing. Like, Das Kapital, other of Marx's writings, is very different, just in the sense that like there's a lot of important theory that isn't just kind of fantasy or like utopianism, but the Communist Manifesto especially kind of is utopian and idealist, and those are Neptune's characteristics, can be. And so anyway, just putting that in there for leftists to think about too, because leftists can also be susceptible to this kind of thing. And I think most leftists in this day and age, if they know their history, if they're not fucking 12 years old and like just have no idea like what's really going on, like most leftists have stopped immanentizing the eschaton and have stopped believing in the dictatorship of the proletariat or like these other like very utopian ideas, because leftists have just been crushed in the past 50, 60, 70 years. So we're a lot less idealist than we used to be, I think. But it is still something to think about. And I think it's important for leftists also to just pay attention to when we're not comfortable being in the mystery and we're not comfortable with not being able to predict what's going to happen or not having all of the information to like assess a situation. Because again, it's like those kind of circumstances that like activate that psychological defense mechanism that just wants to project onto the future. That's just kind of what happens unconsciously when we're trying to spring away from grappling with the really uncomfortable mystery and heavy situations that we're in. And I think, you know, the subject of corrosiveness also kind of fits in a little bit here, because I think this kind of thinking is corrosive to the soul. I think that if you are, you know, every ounce of energy that you are projecting out from yourself and away from this present moment is basically being siphoned away from your ability to do anything with it in this moment. And if you're projecting a lot, if you're sending your consciousness into the future a lot, you don't have as much energy for doing what needs to be done in this moment. So yeah, just some thoughts there. Let me take a moment. If you have any questions or reflections, please let me know in the chat, and then we'll move on to Hegseth's chart real quick. So we're just going to talk about this for a minute here, and I'll you know, maybe do a longer video once I have a chance to look into his biography a little bit more. I meant to mention, if you didn't see it, I did get my whole video out on a medical astrology analysis of Donald Trump's health. It's not super different from what I talked about here in the live stream a few weeks ago, but if you want it like a little bit more coherent and concise, I did get that video out the other day. And I did talk about something I didn't talk about on here, which was his Libra placements and Libra relating to the kidneys. And it's like, if I had to guess like one conspiracy health problem of Trump, it would be that he has some kind of kidney disease that has not, you know, that is officially diagnosed, but is not being shared with the public. So I talk a little bit more about that in that video as well. So yeah, let's just talk a tiny bit about Hegseth here. I am going to talk more on the members only stream after this about the military meeting that he called, but I did think this was an interesting time to pull up his chart. And I also am about halfway through the latest True Anon podcast episode, which is all about Pete Hegseth. And so far, what I've heard is about how he is an alcoholic and a serial cheater and a womanizer. And that is pretty well laid out in his chart. So we do have an exact birth time for Hegseth. And he's got a Gemini sun and Venus retrograde at 29 Gemini in the 7th house. So that's pretty intense. Mercury is in Cancer, almost exactly conjunct Donald Trump's Mercury. Pisces moon at the bottom of the chart, getting these aspects from Neptune and Saturn. That's a lot. I'll say more about that in a second. And then a bunch of Virgo placements at the top of the chart. And I haven't looked at his biography enough to understand the ninth house piece, but Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn are all in Virgo here. And Virgo has a deep shadow side of sadism, basically. And Pete Hegseth was in the military. I forget the specifics, but, served in Iraq, and I am sure used these Virgo energies in very cruel and controlling ways. So, okay. So 28 degrees Pisces moon at the bottom of the chart. This is hard, and it squares this Venus and Gemini in the 7th house. Yeah, I mean, it seems just to have been the story of his life. So he was raised very Christian. He comes from a small town in Minnesota, and he apparently was like a very good Christian and like very straight edge through high school. And then at some point, I think when he was in college or after he was in the ROTC in college. Sorry, I just listened to this podcast episode, so I'm not remembering clearly. But anyway, at some point, he started drinking. And then once he started drinking, he was, pretty much tumbled like right into constant drinking and alcoholism. And that's hard. That's hard with a Pisces moon. I mean, it's also in a little bit of a loose square, but in a loose square to Neptune, T-square with these Neptune and Venus in these late degrees of mutable signs. So, I mean, this kind of placement has strong susceptibility for addiction or various forms of escapism. And it's so close to the bottom of the chart that it's also going to be very hidden and very kind of like tucked away. Although with Hegseth, it does seem like he's not really able to do that anymore. He's not really able to keep that behavior hidden anymore. And so, yeah, again, like in this podcast, the main things I learned is like massive alcoholic and serial cheater. And that's also going to be hard with Venus retrograde in Gemini in the 7th house. Like, obviously, there's people that have these placements that don't become like horrific fascists, and also maybe even that, don't cheat on multiple wives. But even for somebody trying to live this out in a really like, way that is full of integrity, it's going to be kind of hard. And for somebody that doesn't have consciousness and doesn't have integrity and, is just kind of flying by the seat of their pants in terms of their actual morals, like I could see this energy going pretty crazy. And so between the two of these, this is just somebody who is constantly looking for novelty, constantly looking to dissociate, constantly looking to avoid feelings. Of course, somebody with a late Pisces moon feels very deeply. But, if you're a man raised super Christian, joining the military, like you are not going to have any tools for actually managing your like waves of emotion. And so, of course, you're going to find ways to numb all of that out. And of course, if you have a 29-degree Gemini Venus, one of the ways you're going to do that is by relationships and by sex. And then just real quick, so I couldn't find a time for this military meeting that's happening on Tuesday. If anybody knows if they've like announced any specific time, let me know. But this is just for 9 a.m. Yeah, and I didn't notice anything too interesting in the chart for the meeting itself, but I'm sure there is stuff. I'm sure I'm just missing it. But here, if you look at Hegseth's moon, so it's right on this super intense place that I've been talking about this whole time, right at the end of Pisces. Saturn is conjunct the moon. Neptune is conjunct the moon. Neptune is really going to be still conjunct the moon for a lot of years. It's also crossing at the bottom of his chart, so it's interesting that, you know, as I've said before, like bottom of the chart can relate to land, and everything that the military is doing right now is basically like pulling itself back and engaging in the homeland, like in, you know, on Turtle Island itself, and instead of our many overseas bases. And obviously, you know, if I were looking at this chart, if it were a client's chart, first of all, I obviously wouldn't like interpret it in these negative ways that I did. I'm just saying that because I know this stuff about him. But, you know, if I were looking at this as somebody's chart on the personal level, like I would say like, wow, this is a really hard time for this person. They're probably really learning some hard lessons around self-control and boundaries. And, you know, Saturn conjunct the moon, Sadhisatvi in Vedic astrology, I think is what it's called. They look at it as a whole 7-year period that can be challenging. A lot of times people have to reparent themselves in one way or another. The moon relates to your inner child. Saturn is authority, and Saturn conjunct Saturn conjunct natal moon can be an experience where we have to like really claim back our sense of authority, and, you know, maybe from people that we've given it away to. But if you're working with this late Pisces energy, this is not an energy that likes boundaries. It's not an energy that likes to be contained or held in any kind of a structure. And I do think they were commenting on this in the podcast, how it's a rough transition for not only Pete Hegseth, but also like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, and like these basically like they were like podcast bros before, and like it's not the easiest transition for them to like have to show up at the office at like 8 a.m. or whatever regularly. And so Hegseth has this like huge level of control and responsibility right now, and he, you know, it does not seem like his drinking is any more under control. It does not seem like his, you know, temper and emotions are any more under control. So Saturn is just kind of trying to like create some structure there, but I could see how it would be really hard, again, even for a person trying to live this chart with integrity. And then Neptune's just making an even bigger mess of all of it. Other interesting thing that's happening is the South Node is here at the top of the chart, transiting all his Virgo energies. Venus is going to be there too. Mercury is conjunct Hegseth's Pluto the day of this meeting. Yeah, I don't have too many guesses about that, but the guesses that I do have, I'm going to share in my members only live stream after this. So that's all for now. Like I said, I just opened Hegseth's chart earlier today, so there's a lot more to say about it for sure, and I'll definitely be coming back to it. But I want to finish with a card pull and a song here. If you have any questions or if you're noticing anything that I missed, because I think I usually miss a lot when I am looking at a chart, not for like the 80th time. And also, I'm always a little brain frozen when I'm live, so I miss things that I might usually see. So yeah, if I miss anything, feel free to let me know in the comments what jumps out to you. And we'll go ahead and get our cards for this week. Oops. Well, I'm going to take these two that jumped out, and then we'll get an archetype card too. I didn't even ask the question yet. Spirit, can we please get some good advice and some helpful threads for anyone who's watching this as we go through the next week? Okay, so some interesting ones here. Our archetype card is the Storm. And our two alchemy cards are the Drowned King and the Alchemical Wedding. All right, we'll read the alchemy ones first. So the Alchemical Wedding has the keywords of ritual, celebration, and uniting. All hail the Alchemical Wedding. The laboratory morphs into a dreamlike dance floor, and all your allies, fellow alchemists, and ancestors are here to witness the celebration. What was once lost has been found. What was once denied has come fully into the alchemist's embrace. The work is often felt as serious and studious, but the Alchemical Wedding is a moment of levity and lightness. When this card arrives, it is of utmost importance to mark the occasion. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. Honor and acknowledge those who have helped you along the alchemical path. You have come so far. Energy radiates from the uniting of opposites and the redrawing of life's blueprint. The new form has arrived. You'll be back to your existential queries and tinkering in no time. Now the work is to revel in miracles. Well, that's oddly optimistic. And then this one is interesting. This one has a lot of overlap, I think, with the Green Lion eating the sun. So the Drowned King, the keywords are ego collapse, losing face, and humility. Ashley said the Drowned King sounds like an alcoholic. Totally. Totally. In alchemy, the archetype of the king is often used as a symbol for the ego, the aspect of the self that is attached to its title, name, and identity. It's said that the Drowned King is a required phase in the process of transformation. Only through dissolving who they thought they were is the king able to become who they are destined to be, a kind and benevolent leader. How does the drowning occur? Not voluntarily, that's for certain. Those circumstances beyond their control, the king is brought to their bottom, to their knees. When this card appears, expect a huge blow to the ego, impactful enough that it causes one to turn their life around, prioritizing grace over greed, benevolence over brutality, sovereignty over selfishness. The Drowned King eventually resurfaces as a fully changed, benevolent being. Yeah, so that's an interesting combination. The Drowned King definitely has, again, like I said, a lot of overlap with the lion eating the sun and just a lot of Neptunian and Piscean energies in there. And then the storm, chaos, the whirlwind, the disorder. Possessing an energy much like the Tarot's Tower card, the storm undoes all that is. Everything that was solid, known, and relied upon is stripped away by the winds of fate. The ground becomes the sky becomes the center, and then the center disappears. The storm is a great equalizer. No matter how far we've come on the path, no matter our age, wealth, or wisdom, we can't hide from its savage winds. Their disturbing howls stir anxiety and make it impossible to see and think straight. You must wait it out. If you try to fight the storm, you will lose. A better option is to seek temporary shelter and a reliable friend. When all else fails, go within. There, for a moment, you settle into the eye of the storm. The storm's intention is to rebalance your equilibrium. It's a result of precarious conditions, not the cause of them. And the storm can also lay bare the truth that there are forces larger than you. This understanding is a relief, but also a predicament of power that requires your surrender. Well, I really don't know what to make of the alchemical wedding in here. The drowned king and the storm, they do feel pretty ominous regarding this military meeting that's coming up. The alchemical wedding, I don't know what to make of that in context of the collective. But also, the storm, there's definitely some Neptunian energies there as well. And there may be a message from all of these cards for us on the personal level to celebrate the blows to the ego, celebrate the loss of control, celebrate the Neptunian experience of not knowing what the fuck you're doing, what direction you're going in, not being able to see in front of you. As always, let me know in the comments if you have additional thoughts, and I will post the descriptions and pictures of these cards for us all to dig deeper. All right, we are going to finish with a song tonight, and we are going to go one step further into the EP. So just as a refresher, if anyone's new here, I am slowly dripping out songs that I would love to one day produce as an EP. And the name of the EP is The Tender Flesh Alive Beneath the Scars. And I have shared already Timelines and The Omen and Surrendered I Am Stronger. And tonight I'm going to play Ghosts. Haven't practiced very much at all, but this one isn't too hard. Baby, this house is haunted. Time to reckon with all my ghosts. Burned some sage, but they didn't want it. Said they'd come when I need them most. Now they're circling round my altar. Now they're knocking on my door. Told me they just wanna be honored. Feel the flame just one time more. Oh, 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 oh. Another shiver through up on the wall. They throw me off of the cosmic cliff and light me a spliff to break the fall. I got lost in indecision, threw my hands up in the air. I'm not asking for permission to tell the world I fucking care. You know you're not alone into the same skies we have flown, and the same winds have blown, and the same signs have been shown. You know you're not alone, we can see the wings you've grown. Take your seat upon the throne, reap the seeds that you have sown. You know you're not alone, oh you know you're not alone. Now fate, she is the cruelest master, cards held so close to her chest. She leads me on with ever after, leaves me empty, nothing left. But oh, the game has many players, and everyone's got different rules. The only way is through the layers. You're only safe when you play the fool. So baby, don't pretend to know me. Ooh, I think these ghosts are taking bets. I asked them where I ought to be going. The only thing they said was yes. Asked them where I ought to be going. Ooh, the only thing they said was yes. I don't really know how that one ends, but that's Ghosts. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are a member, find me right after this on our members only live stream. If you're not a channel member, there's a link in the description box to become one. It is only $2.99 a month. It's a super amazing way to support me and support this channel. And I will also just make one totally shameless ask right now. So I am so close to getting this channel like fully monetized, like where I actually get paid for people watching the videos. But I could swear, and I hate to be someone that bitches about the algorithm, but I could swear that YouTube has like stopped showing my videos to new people, because when I started this channel, my subscriber numbers went up at least a few every time I posted a new video. And these days that is just not happening. And if I had 43 more subscribers, I would be getting paid at least like pennies just for people watching the videos. So I will just make the shameless ask that if you have like extra email addresses, like go subscribe to this channel like under your like old email address from 10 years ago or whatever, and help me get to 1,000 subscribers so that I can get a little cash from the corporation directly and not just from everybody's, you know, personal pockets. That's my dream. It's like pretty dreamy, right? To think of making some of your money not from people's personal pockets and just from the corporations that have all the money. So yes, Emily, only 43 more. We can do it. Help me get there. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Come see me for the members stream in just a minute, and I will see you all next week.